Welcome to the Jali podcast. I'm your host, Melyssa Barrett. This podcast is for those who are interested in the conversation around diversity, inclusion, and equity. Each week, I'll be interviewing a guest who has something special to share or is actively part of building solutions in this space. Let's get started. All right, this week we are so excited, as I always am, to meet someone that I think everybody's going to be excited about. I have the honor of introducing Fuentes, and I am so excited to have you. So thank you for being on the Jali podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here as well.
Yes, and I am excited when I get to meet new people, which I have been getting to do a lot lately. And I know, so I wanted to maybe just start a little bit because everybody has their own story. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up at the UN.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a long journey. I'm from Southern California. I come from Mexican migrant parents. I'm the first in my family to go to any school after high school. I went community college for like 4 years while I worked full time. Finally transferred. I went away to the Bay Area where I did 2 years at a public university in Sonoma, where I studied political science. And that's where I kind of got into, I would call it a United Nations, kind of like a nerdy group where we participated in mock sessions, and my love for international development grew from there. That led into a foray into local politics, which led into the Peace Corps. And that awoke my consciousness to how much I didn't know about development work and the problematic of being although women of color coming from a Western nation, imposing stuff into local communities, and which then led into grad school to learn more about that. And now I'm an intern at the United Nations. So
that's so awesome. So awesome. So tell me a little bit, because I know I do want to kind of start with just some of the recruitment process, because it's not like people just wake up and then they can just get into the UN intern process. So how did you even find out about it, and how were you able to get into it?
Yeah, like I said, I've kind of learned more about the United Nations when I was in undergrad. And even then I knew there was a lot of barriers because while the UN is present in almost all nations and has local offices, there's a lot of barriers for people of color, especially for poor people who have no connections into politics or diplomacy to get into that sort of stuff. So even like when I was, I was an untraditional student because I was like 27 in my junior year of undergrad. Even then, I knew I kind of had to lay the groundwork there to get to where I am now, when I'm almost 32. So I, got into Model United Nations, try to network, make connections with people that were working in the New York offices. My professors were really well connected as well. They suggested, just work your way towards that. Think about grad school, think about like meeting people that will connect you to these positions, because it, like you said, you don't just apply, you have to know somebody to get into beyond the application pool. So from there, I, got involved in local politics, where I met people that were in positions of power and, who knew people who might be in positions where I wanted to be. And from then, because I didn't have any diplomatic experiences, somebody had told me join the Peace Corps, which is kind of like a development organization, but not really, because it's a way for the U.S. to enhance their diplomatic relationships with the global South, and through there get experience, which I did in some ways. I learned, like I said, I learned how much I didn't know about the type of intentional work that goes into development and the type of work that the UN actually does. And because I was getting all those experiences of like, I don't know how to create sustainable projects, I don't know how to involve communities. That led me to looking for grad schools. And the grad school that I'm at right now, Middlebury Institute of International Studies, is known as a school where you go if you want to get into the United Nations, which is my goal, because back when I was 26. Um, and from then, I've been very intentional about networking with the type of people that I want to work with, especially people that are people of color, people that know the barriers, that some way got their foot into the door and are now opening that up for people like me. And I networked with some alumni. I met some wonderful, Americans that are working with the United UN Women. Some alumni that are in this group that we have is called Shades, which is the group for BIPOC alumni. And yeah, they like opened the doors. They've told me, there are career fairs. I can get your resume in. So I've done like 20 informational interviews, got into career fairs, finally spoke with somebody that's like, yeah, we can get you into this US funded program at the UN, because there's also the barrier of UN internships not being paid. So yeah, after
Yeah.
all of that, I'm finally in here.
Awesome.
As an intern, it's quite the journey. It's a lot.
So tell me a little bit about the UN. And I'm specifically, it's interesting to me because I think when we were talking, you were saying how, when you're in the UN, it's like America is almost in the minority.
Yes.
And so, like, can you talk about like, what do you do at the UN? And then maybe I find it cool that they actually have their own ERGs for BIPOC women, BIPOC employees and stuff. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, so the UN does a lot. It was created after World War II to prevent, mass scale wars, but it's evolved into an agency that does everything. They do work with women, they do work with children, work in the areas of agriculture, health, economy, peace building. The agency where I'm at, it's called the International Atomic Energy Agency, and we work with nuclear. And the agency is both the nuclear watchdog of the world. So you hear about it like now with the Ukraine and Russia, you hear about it with Iran. But we also do a lot of development work. The department that I am specifically takes nuclear technology and science, and we apply it to development programs, helping cancer prevention with radiotherapy. We do modification to plants so that they're more drought resistant. We help with monitoring plastic in the ocean and in rivers. And it's at the agency, what I've learned within all the interns, there's quite a bit of us, is that Americans are a little bit in a position of privilege because we're underrepresented at the agency. Throughout all agencies, throughout the UN system, it seems that Americans don't want to work in very diplomatic, bureaucratic agencies like the UN, because one, they don't pay that well, and two, it seems like there's a lack of intercultural competency that we're taught at the state level over there. So there's not very desirable positions, and they're actually like actively recruit Americans when they're opening up positions in the UN. It's a bit of a sour point because we're seen as a Western country that's more developed, but then we're also underrepresented and they want to give us jobs. So they see that as a bit of an unfairness, and we're not the most well liked in the UN.
It's a different line to walk for sure. I think because everybody's talking about recruiting and diversity, equity, and inclusion, but yeah. It's an interesting view, kind of sitting from the UN perspective when you're thinking about, and myself anyway, as an American.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting. And then, so you were talking about some of the things that you're doing with development of, utilizing nuclear technology, I'll say, for things like cancer and all of that, which has to be, pretty rewarding when you're, especially as a woman of color that is, kind of sitting in the seat at the UN, really kind of making sure people have the information to make change, not only for one country, but potentially for many.
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty interesting. I have like the privilege of working in this specific region, which is Latino America and the Caribbean. And, it's such a diverse group of nations with, a plethora of different languages and communities and needs. And it's been really great because the agency does do a good job of hiring people from these nations that know their communities well and will advocate for them at the local level. And even though, I am Latina, I don't know intimately all of these communities because I have been raised in California. And even though I like to refer Southern California as Little Mexico, it really is not me. It's not. It's very different. So it's been.
It used to be. It used to be.
And in many ways, it still is.
Yes.
But yeah, it's been great. I've learned a lot. I mean, I was one of those people that would hear nuclear and be like, thought of all the negative stuff, thought of Hiroshima and Fukushima, and thought like that we don't want nuclear. It's radioactive. You get sick from it. And like I've learned that it really does help, like not only with energy needs, but cancer care. Or even getting your x-ray, like if you break a leg or an arm, you get an x-ray done. That's nuclear technology. And it's like mostly cost effective. A lot of the agency puts in a lot of the budget, and really does, from what I've seen, try to bring in country ownership of the solutions and live them with the technology that they can then develop on their own and develop their nation as they see the need for, which is great and refreshing.
That is awesome. That's awesome. So you said your path also went through kind of the political space.
Yes, I did.
What was that like?
It was a very short foray into local politics in the Bay Area. I did some campaign work, which is where we met our mutual friend Serena.
Shout out to Serena.
And it was great to see like local politics in action, considering the state of the US politics now. This was before, 2020 and all that. But yeah, it was, just trying to, I've always been fascinated by how organizations work and how governments work and why they are the way they are and who's involved in, decision-making, who's left out. So back then I wanted to understand, being in Sonoma County, where a lot of the farming is done by migrants, where a lot of the wealth is not, given to migrants, it's given to people that don't look like us. So I wanted to get involved in grassroots movements. I wanted to see like how we can get Latinos and Black people and Asian people involved to get more of a share in power and decision making. But I realized back then I was probably too young and too idealistic to really kind of get more involved into it. It got disillusioned pretty fast. I really saw like not the ugly side, but the difficult choices and compromising that goes into politics. And I was like, I'm not sure if this is for me. I don't know if I have the heart to get into that because I sometimes give too much and then get burned out quickly. So it was in that space where I met somebody. They were like, maybe you should do the Peace Corps. It seems like something up your alley where you get to help communities, but from more of a like grassroots, not sort of political red tape perspective, which was a lie. The second part, the first part was you do get to your community, but there's always red tape involved somehow. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it was great. It was a great look into how local politics work. I realized that if I were ever to go into politics, it would probably be like at the city council level because there it's where politics is most accountable, right? Because usually it's your neighbor or your, I don't know, your doctor or your local educator
Yes.
running for office. So you know them and you can hold them accountable and it's more transparent. So
Yeah, you definitely walk by and see them, and you can kind of touch and feel those versus the ones in, even at the county or state level. Sometimes you don't always see them. Although in my district, we see ours quite a bit. But I will, it's difficult to feel like you're truly connected if you can't kind of reach out and touch. So, it's challenging for sure. Do you think you'll be in political office one day? So, is city council in your future?
I've considered it, and people have told me like you'd be really great. But I don't know if I'm the type of person that can compromise. Because if I think something like, we really need universal healthcare, we really need public transportation, like I would fight till we get that. And I know that I would probably not make many friends going through that.
Okay, so then shifting gears a little bit, because today, and it's quite late out there right now, you're in Vienna.
Yes. Yes, I'm
So
Filipina.
So, and I know some of the things I think we had talked and we talked about how, they're just when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, some of the biases that we may have, for example, are like when we see signs for, like pregnant parking, there'll be a woman on the sign, or, there'll be, a woman changing diapers if it's, for a bathroom or, whatever, a baby changing station or something like that. And I know in Vienna, things are a little bit different in terms of what you see. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think
Yeah.
it's so interesting to me because, you don't, that's why they call it unconscious bias. You don't actually even realize you have some of the unconscious biases that you have.
Yeah. So, keeping in line with childcare and women and child rearing, that was one of the unconscious biases that I also held until I came here and I realized I always expect women to be the ones with children. Like whenever I see children, I expect the mother to be behind that. And when I got here, I realized that that's not the case here. I started seeing a lot of men with strollers, holding babies, going after babies. And I started realizing that I would see it equally with like men and women. And it'd be like, hold on, like what's happening? Like I would see like I realized in myself that I'd see a woman with a kid, didn't think about it, okay, it's a woman with a kid. But then I would see a man with their child and be like, okay, that's cool. But then it started happening like the 15th time, the 20th time, and I was like, what is happening here? Like this is kind of cool. You see like almost more men taking their kids to school than women in the morning, and I am still kind of amazed at that. Not to say that there aren't dads that don't take care of their kids back in the US, but we definitely see a lot more mothers, taking their kids to school, or it's their kind of their role to make sure that they go to the doctor so that they're going to like whatever activity. Whereas here I found that it's more equal. It might have to do with, the way that they're giving parental leave here. It's not maternal leave, it's parental. And yeah, there's not a lot of like division of like gendered roles here in terms of parenting, the way that I've seen it, anecdotally in the subway. It's been pretty cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. And I mean, and I've never been to Vienna, so what other things are out? I know we talked about just even the safety of it in terms of,
Yeah.
And I think some of our conversation was even like, when you think about safety, like why is it so safe there? And I think you were talking about a lot of, potential reasons for that. So
Yeah. So I think, some of that conversation was that I've noticed that here I don't see as much policing or police officers as there is back home. There is police stations in every district, but I've been here 4 months and I think I've seen police officers maybe 4 times. Crime rate is relatively low, but one of the things that I've, done in some light research on and from speaking with people here is that Vienna takes care of its people. It provides social services, it provides mental health services. It makes sure that there's rent control. It makes sure that if people are hungry, that they're fed. If they don't have a home, that there's home provided for them. And it's not perfect, but there is quite a low rate of crime. And because of that, I'm not sure, it's like the what came first, chicken or the egg, if there's low crime because there's a lack of feeling policed, or if there's a lack of police because there's, no need for a person to maybe commits a small crime of like, I don't know, stealing something, or if they're going through mental health stuff, they're having their needs met. And it feels quite safe to me. Not having that presence makes me feel a little bit safer. I don't know if it's just my bias as a person of color, but yeah, it's make me wonder, like, does providing social services like mental health and making sure that people are housed and fed and warm lower crime and thus prevent the need from having an overly police state? And it's made me want to research that more and wonder if that model can replicate it in places like the US, where we do have an over policed presence in our communities.
Let's pause for a moment. We'll be right back. And what's interesting to me is your work at the UN, because as you think about getting to know the community, you start really realizing all of the things that intersect.
Yeah.
And, potentially why things exist the way they do. And then you start questioning, right? Especially now, I think you start questioning, like, why is it that way? And why does it have to be that way?
Mm-hmm.
And can we change it to something else? What else is out there? And I think it used to be that you could kind of pull together politicians to kind of come to the center and figure out, like, hey, maybe this could work. But, I know in the US, things have been so divisive that you don't see that kind of connection like we used to.
It's really been polarized. And to me, it always goes back to like the where a country started, right? Like, I there's this, I guess, this argument here, at least. I always get told here that Americans bring race into everything. And my argument is like, we don't. You guys started with the race when you started colonizing. But they always say it's about class. And from my understanding, as the argument of like separating indigenous, black, and white, poor whites was, let's make it about they're taking your stuff, and which I think it's what's happening now. Migrants come to take our jobs. Other people are too over reliant on the system, and what's left for the poor white person, and that's when they stick their claws and kind of like make propaganda towards that. And I think it's really sad that in the US, and not that it's not happening here, but that in the US we can't compromise or come together on issues because we have like that scarcity mindset that if I don't have it, they have it, where it really is like a percentage of people hoarding all the resources. But I'm gonna go at a socialist tangent here. But yeah, it really, like, living here has made me question like why we can't provide the basic necessities for people in the US, why we're, taxed as much as some people here in Europe, but then we don't have access to healthcare, we don't have a affordable education, we can't house our people. And, we get fed this line that America is the greatest democracy and we have the greatest economy, but like, where do we see that? We don't see that. Here people don't make as much money. Their minimum wage is 1,200 euros. But I seen maybe two people experiencing homelessness here.
Wow.
Like I said, there's like almost no police presence. There's public transportation that can take you anywhere, and it's like really affordable. If I get sick, I have access to a doctor. So it really makes you think about like, are we the best? Or are we just like a place that was also colonized and we were just given the illusion that we were never colonized and that we developed? But I don't know, it's really made me think about where we are as a nation and like who we really are. Like, are we a developed nation or are we also a developing nation that just has, the Gucci belt?
Interesting. Well, and I find it really interesting because, I mean, you and your experience at, you're in your early 30s. I'm, let's just say, a little older than that. but but it's so interesting to me because I know when I was 30, I wasn't quite thinking the way you are now. And so I see so many folks in your age group that are, and I'm not saying they didn't think that way, because a lot of people did.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, it was like getting into politics and, understanding your community and all of that, really has just come over the last, maybe 15 years. For me, because I think, sometimes you look up and it's like, oh, I got a husband and kids and, I'm like doing this, but I got to focus and I just got to get to work and get home. But there's all these other things that, you start thinking about. And so for me personally, I'm actually really encouraged by, the generation because information is coming so fast that, you all are really having to make decisions much quicker than, generations before. So it's encouraging as an older person to see our youth kind of thinking like that for me. So I think that's awesome.
Well, first of all, thank you for referring to me as a youth.
30 is a youth because I'm not 30. So
well, you look like you're in your 30s too. But
bless your heart.
Thank you. For me, it's been interesting. I think coming from migrant parents has always it led me to be interested in development because I would always question, why would somebody want to leave their community, the place where they feel safe, where they have their ancestral ties, where they speak the language, to go to a place where they aren't loved? I mean, my parents are Mexican. And while we're in a place where, Spanish is spoken, you can find a Mexican restaurant in California anywhere. But at the national level, we're villainized. We get told, there's cartels and they bring violence and they're bad men. So I always wondered, even since I was little, why would they leave their home? Why would people want to leave their home? And it's not because they genuinely believe they would love America more. It's just because that's where opportunity was. And it made me question, well, why is this opportunity not offered in Mexico? Or like, why are places like Haiti or Dominica Republicana or, Yemen, like, what about their systems failing that the people feel a need to leave, whether it's political violence or lack of economic opportunity? Like, how can we provide these countries with the tools that they need to develop in the way that they need to develop? And yeah, that's, since then, that question when I was a little girl has led me to where I am now, and still trying to figure out ways in which we can empower communities to change and develop in the way that they want to not feel the need to leave their home to work.
Yeah.
You have doctors working as farmers, which farm work is important, but I couldn't imagine, I have an aunt who's a psychologist. She was a psychologist in Mexico, and because of necessity, she works in Central Valley, California, being a farm worker. and she's an educated woman. And I know, like I said, farm work is really important, but we really have, it's kind of sad that she had to leave her profession, something that she loved, because she couldn't make money, because she couldn't afford, because, many reasons, where she had to disconnect from her home to come somewhere else to be vilified, just because there was lack of opportunity or safety.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I had a conversation with my mother who is from Panama.
Mhm.
And one of the things, and it struck her, I think, with all of the events of January 6th.
Mhm. Mhm.
We were sitting here at the time and like, what's going on? And it actually triggered something for her when she was being raised in Panama. One of the reasons her mother wanted to leave was because she remembered kind of that type of resurrectionist activity happening in Panama and seeing the blood that was draining down the street, because of the machetes that they used to use, on people. And so it was interesting to me because I had never heard that story before. But it was one of the reasons that they emigrated to the United States. And then to see it happening in the United States for her was just like, what is happening? So it's really interesting when you reference like why people are doing that. But I'm sure there's all sorts of reasons, but opportunities being the biggest.
Yeah, and it's I don't know if it's funny or ironic, maybe ironic now that like there's, I'm on TikTok and there's some parts of TikTok where there are people in Mexico or Ecuador, countries that are traditionally you see people immigrating from them to the US for opportunity, or you having Americans now traveling to Mexico, gentrification, because there's no opportunity for them in the US now. And I find that so interesting that, they're still in their wages because, hybrid remote work or remote work now, and they're coming to Mexico or they're coming to Argentina, Uruguay, Panama to live there because they can't afford to live in the US. And it's
Yeah.
still kind of mind-boggling for me to think that now it's reversed. So people our age or younger having to move away from the US because they can't afford housing or they can't afford to, pay their bills. They have to move away from their families so that their wages that are being paid in the US can last them more somewhere else, which we also see with the retiree community. When I lived in Ecuador, there was a huge expat community in Cuenca from retirees that their social security was not enough to live back home, so they had to live somewhere else.
Interesting. So how many places have you been with this UN
Well,
internship and all of this? You've been all over the place.
well, when I lived in Ecuador, it's actually when I was in the Peace Corps, I was an education volunteer.
Okay.
Which was great. I, got to experience another Latino culture, which is very different from my Mexican one. I learned another dialect of Spanish, which is great. And like I said, that's where it kind of got awoken to what development work really is, and like concepts like white saviorism and not bringing my Western perspective and expecting to change the world where people probably don't even want me there. They want to change the world themselves for their own communities. So it really kind of made me aware of my own ego and my weaknesses, and helped me grow as a person now where I see development from a different point of view, more grassroots perspective. So
well, since you brought up the term, do you want to tell us about white saviorism?
well, well, it's really the concept of Westerners and kind of putting their own solutions into problems that they probably caused and telling people how they should develop or grow. And we see it's pretty problematic because there's this belief that as developed or global North nations, we've hindered the development of other countries, and then we're telling them, well, you're really not growing the way that you should, you're not modernizing the way that you should, this is what you should do. So it's like creating the problem and then providing the solutions in our own terms. And a white savior thinks that they can come into any community and just solve all of the problems from their own perspective without ignoring what the community actually wants or needs. And I kind of saw that in Peace Corps. I remember the capital city of Ecuador is pretty modern. It's pretty cosmopolitan. You have a lot of our international organizations, a lot of embassies. And I remember some volunteers being disappointed because they couldn't see the poverty that they were coming to solve. And I remember they do in the Peace Corps what they call cultural trips, where they take you to either an indigenous community or an Afro-Latino community so that you learn that it's not just mestizos. It's not, what you think a typical Latino looks like. There's Black Latinos, and there's Latinos that are indigenous, and there's Latinos that are Asian. And I remember going to one of the coastal states where it's mostly Afro-Latinos, and a volunteer saying, "Oh, this is what I came for. Like, this is what I thought poverty would look like. I can work with this." And I was like so taken aback. So I was like, well, "What do you mean this is what you came for?" She's like, "Well, this is what we thought as soon as a volunteer. What we came." She's like, "Quito is like, you don't see this." And I was like, I'm still shocked to this day that she would say that this is what I came for, to help and like the poor people. And I was like, I just like not like othering people and not seeing them as human beings, and getting like poverty fetish, I think what is the term that some people put on that. But yeah, that type of attitude is pretty pervasive in some development circles, and it's something that I try to avoid in my own work and in my own self as I continue to move forward in this field. So
yeah, some of those microaggressions that people don't quite grasp. But the more we talk about it, the more people can perhaps get an understanding. At least we hope.
Yes, I sure hope so. And I hope that person has reflected on that and moved beyond that self. So
yeah, but it's interesting because as you talk about it in, all of these other sense of, working in the Peace Corps or at the UN, and then, we think about, working at a corporation and they have ERGs there and microaggressions and, all of the things that you're talking about happen on, whether it be on a macro scale or on a micro scale. So it's really interesting when we think about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, how many, perspectives and just the broad nature of. That's why on the Jali podcast, I talk to so many different people about so many different things, because there's so many different ways to think about what we're doing in the world and just put a DEI lens on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To make sure that we're being intentional.
Yeah, I mean, it really does manifest in a lot of different fields and similar in very different ways. I think back to where I work with right now, like it's so beautiful to see all the different types of nations that are represented. And even then, like the kind of politics it takes, like it's to work in this intercultural space. My favorite part is in the morning in the elevator, because I will hear colleagues. I work like I said, in my department, I work in the Latino American Caribbean division, but within the floors, we have the Asian and Pacific, we have African, we have Europe. So as I'm going up to my 11th floor, I pass through all the different, I go up all the different floors in the elevator. I'll hear French, and I'll hear like Yoruba, and I'll hear Spanish, and I'll hear Mandarin and Japanese, and just all these different languages. And I really am enjoying like working with all these different cultures. But even then, it's just like navigating. Like you have to really make sure that you're respectful of people's faces, because we all have different perspectives of spaces. Latinos are like typically like to be in your face, that. But there's some other cultures that want more separation. The way that you greet people, and the way that they want to be greeted, and it's difficult and beautiful, and sometimes you commit a lot of faux pas, and you got to learn. So
you got to learn. That's the thing. You just want people to be open to learning.
Yes.
That's the thing. So that's awesome. So now tell us, I'll ask you this last question about, kind of some of the things that you're doing there at the UN. Because
Mhm.
I would, what's interesting to me is I think there's so many people here, certainly, that are looking to increase and improve their own focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion because of the innovation and the perspectives that it delivers. And here you have the UN, who literally has all of these nations sitting at the table doing all this wonderful work. What is it like?
Um, it's great, and it also comes with a lot of compromise here. The type of work that I do program management work, or I assist with program management work. As I said, I'm an intern, so I kind of get to do all the tasks that nobody else wants to do.
Yes.
I do program design where countries have identified, for example, their needs and how we can help as a nuclear agency. So, for example, in Costa Rica, we're helping design a program that will monitor for severe drought conditions using isotope technology, which I still don't completely understand, but I'm getting there. Um, nuclear science is really complex, and I really admire women that go into those fields because, from what I've seen, it's male dominated.
Mm,
Women are making their headway, and I think the agency is doing really great in trying to recruit women from all corners of the world. But yeah, so I do program design. I do a lot of finance work, working with DHL and a lot of global freight forwarders to make sure that our member states have their equipment when they need it. For example, the agency was in charge of making sure that during this pandemic, every member state, which is 190, I think we're 130 something. I got to confirm that number. But we made sure that every member state, and even members that were in states that are not members of the agency, got PCR kits so that they can detect
hmm.
COVID and treat it. So when I came in, it was already 2022, and we're still trying to make sure that some countries had their equipment delivered after 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So I've gotten to talk to people in like Senegal with like my broken French, people in Singapore and Malaysia, Panama as well, Cuba, with my broken language skills, trying to communicate in English. And sometimes it's really interesting because level of English skill, it's our lingua franca at the agency. Even though we have 6 recognized UN languages, we really operate in English. So sometimes it's hard when you're trying to talk about complex issues where there's different levels of language skills.
Right.
And I think that's still a hurdle we can better overcome. Not sure how yet, but definitely something to keep in mind as we move forward in development, especially if we want to give ownership of the projects to local countries. I've also done help with like events. We had our general conference where every member state came to talk about what kind of solutions nuclear technology can give in the field. And there we talked to ambassadors and ministers of like science and technology and education. We do, um, work with health, and we trying to find ways in which we can cure things like cancer, colon cancer, which is pretty treatable with radiotherapy, but not accessible to a lot of developing nations. So we want to make sure that they have proper access to healthcare. We want to make sure that we're fighting child nutrition. So it's really a lot of different projects that we do at the agency, and it's a lot of rewarding work. And like I said, I love that I do get to connect with people that have different stories to tell, that have different experiences, and that have a lot of knowledge to impart that maybe I might not have otherwise gotten in another field.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I don't know that I ever thought about the UN as a career opportunity. So I think there's probably lots of people out there that maybe wouldn't think of it either until you're talking about it now. And there's such a broad connection to doing, whether it's, technology, science, there's so many different things that you all are doing, which is phenomenal.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And like I said, the UN is really in any topic that you can possibly think of, it's probably involved with, whether it's, providing more political empowerment for women, you have UN Women. If it's child nutrition, you have UNICEF. If it's education and World Heritage, there's UNESCO. We are also, Interpol, which is the International Police, which we talked about. That's also the UN, IAEA, like I said, nuclear UN. You have also programs that are very specific that deal in like nuclear proliferation or armed proliferation, trying to prevent arms from spreading more. You have programs that try to preserve art. So any topic that you can think of is probably done by the UN and one of its agencies.
Interesting. Really interesting. That's awesome. Well, this is interesting. We could go on and on. I think, I think we'll have to continue the conversation because I can't wait to see what else you'll be doing over there. So now that I have a new friend over here, Steph, I'm gonna call you and see how it's going over there.
Yeah, and whenever you want to come over to Vienna, just let me know. We'd be happy to host you here.
Look, don't say it if you don't want me to come, because Vienna might be on my list.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Whenever you want.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I absolutely love it. I love your background as well.
Thank you.
Some of them won't be able to see it, but you want to tell them what it is?
Yes, it's the Shire. This is where Bilbo Baggins lives, Frodo as well. And I love Lord of the Rings. I'm kind of a fantasy nerd.
Kudos and shout out.
But
shout out to the Lord of the Rings fans.
These cold winter nights, this is where I want to be.
No doubt. No doubt. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to more conversations. And thanks for joining me, Steph.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me on the Jali podcast. Please subscribe so you won't miss an episode. See you next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.